This is the Antikythera Mechanism. Often called the world's first computer, it was built to track the movements of the heavens themselves. And yet, according to some, it simply shouldn't exist. To others, it's proof of a lost, highly advanced ancient civilization. And to many, it stands alone, a machine with no clear predecessors and no archaeological or historical evidence of anything like it.
So today, let's dig deeper into the Antikythera mechanism. What evidence do we have for ancient analog computers? How unique was the Antikythera mechanism? And for fun, let's see what other types of ancient technology existed in antiquity. Here's a hint, it's quite a lot. My name is Dr. Hugh Thomas. Let's dig deeper into the Antikythera mechanism and other ancient technologies. Hi, my name's Hugh. I have a PhD in archaeology, I'm a lecturer of archaeology, and for the last 20-something years or so, I've been taking part in archaeological fieldwork all around the world. Now, it's called the Antikythera mechanism because it was found in a shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera, a very small island between sort of the Peloponnese and Crete. Antikythera holds a little special part of my heart because my very first fieldwork experience was on the island of Kythera, and I would regularly look out to sea and on clear days be able to see the island of Antikythera in the distance. So in 1900, divers found this shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean near Antikythera. It was excavated over the following few years, and on that shipwreck they found a lot of beautiful archaeological material, including sculptures, glassware, coins, and of course the Antikythera device. In amongst all the debris of the wreck, there were these corroded pieces of bronze. Now, they didn't really pay much attention to them at the beginning because they were kind of more focused on the pretty things like the sculptures, and yeah, they are incredibly beautiful. However, eventually they realized that they had something truly unique on their hands. The Antikythera mechanism is widely accepted to be the first analog computer, and it's thought that it is some form of astronomical device where it can chart the movement of things like the sun, moon, and planets. Now, to be fair, they've only found about a third of the actual device, so there is some conjecture about exactly how it worked and how it moved, but
the general thought is that by turning a hand crank, it would move a series of interlocking gears inside the mechanism. This would move several hands that represented the sun, the moon, and the 5 known celestial planets. It also likely depicted both lunar and solar eclipses.
Now, we can't directly date the object itself through scientific methods, but we can look at things like the sculpture, the pottery, the coins, in order to work out a rough relative date for this object. And there's also been one C14 date done of some of the wood that was found at the shipwreck, although this was done quite a long time ago, so its results might be a bit skewy.
The evidence at the moment suggests that the device likely dates to somewhere between the 1st to 2nd century BCE, with the shipwreck occurring potentially around the middle of the 1st century BCE.
Now, I'm not going to go much more into how the device was designed and how we think it works, because there are a litany of different videos and academic articles and newspaper articles and TV shows specifically about that topic. Today, I just want to focus on whether the Antikythera mechanism is unique. What other evidence do we have for advanced ancient machines like this in antiquity? One of the things you'll see brought up on social media again and again is that the Antikythera mechanism is the only machine we've found in antiquity that has evidence of gears, little pronged teeth going around a circle and interlocking with another one. A lot of people will say that this is a technology that shouldn't exist at this time, and that it's not something that is developed for centuries afterwards, perhaps indicating there was some form of ancient advanced civilization. That's true. The Antikythera mechanism is the most sort of complex piece of ancient technology that we have uncovered. However, there is one other very fragmentary piece of archaeological evidence that indicates that gears with these teeth existed in antiquity, and it comes from the island of Sardinia.
During emergency excavations in Olbia, they found this gear. Now, it can't be directly dated, but it was found in a unit that contained ceramics from the 5th to the 2nd centuries BCE and a coin from the late 3rd century. So this would make it potentially earlier or at about the same time as the Antikythera mechanism. Although I should say there is some debate about whether it might be a later intrusion based off the amount of zinc in the metal.
One of the reasons we likely don't find many of these geared objects from antiquity is the fact that metal was regularly melted down in order to create new things. Take, for example, bronze sculptures. We know that there were a lot of them in antiquity. They were pretty common. But we don't find many of them archaeologically because if you're an invading army, you walk in, you say, oh, look, great, a bronze statue. I'm going to grab that, take it, melt it down, turn it into coins or weapons or something else. A really good example of this is what's called chryselephantine statues. Those are statues that are made out of ivory for the skin and gold for the clothing. Now, we know that they were commonly found in antiquity. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was a chryselephantine statue. We know that the Parthenon on the Acropolis had a 13-meter high statue of Athena made in the chryselephantine technique. Like the Antikythera mechanism, we hardly find any evidence of chryselephantine statues. We've found just a few fragmentary examples. These ones come from the site of Delphi, for example. But although archaeology is the analysis of material culture, one of the things we also do is look at ancient literature. And when we look at the ancient literature, we find a lot of different examples of devices that sound very, very similar to the Antikythera mechanism. In the 1st century BCE, which is when the Antikythera shipwreck likely happened, the author Cicero wrote about the ancient inventor Archimedes, who existed a couple of centuries beforehand. And when he was describing Archimedes and his inventions, he mentions that Archimedes invented something that sounds really, really similar to the Antikythera mechanism.
It's called the sphere of Archimedes, or an Archimedes sphere, and that's a term that's going to pop up a lot in this video because it seems like whenever anyone describes an object like the Antikythera device, they call them this Archimedes sphere. Now, there are 2 objects mentioned in this, but one specifically caught Cicero's eye, and he says that when Gallus began to describe this mechanism, that Archimedes appeared to me to possess more genius than human nature would seem to be capable of. He describes the device as a sphere on which the motions of the sun, moon, and those 5 stars, which are called wandering and irregular, are shown. And he says that this invention of Archimedes discovered a method of producing the unequal and various courses with their dissimilar velocities by 1 revolution. And then when Gallus put this sphere in motion, the moon was made to succeed the sun by as many revolutions of the brass circle as it actually took to do days in the heavens, from which the same setting of the sun was produced on the sphere as in the heavens, and the moon fell on the very point where it met the shadow of the earth, when the sun from the region ... And we don't have the rest of the passage.
So Cicero mentions that it's a device that would put in motion celestial objects, which sounds like a way that you would describe the Antikythera mechanism. But Cicero also mentions another person called Posidonius, who was also incredibly smart. And Posidonius one day was just like, well, I'm going to build one too.
So Posidonius makes one, a sphere which with each revolution reproduces the same motions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that take place in the heavens every 2400.
But there are other ancient sources apart from Cicero that also look at devices that would chart celestial movements. So let's run through them pretty quickly. Let's go.
So Ovid, writing in the 1st century AD, mentions a globe encased in bronze produced by Archimedes. Sextus Empiricus, writing in the 3rd century, mentions that again, structures that move by themselves are more admirable than those which do not. And he states that Archimedes' sphere was something in which the sun and the rest of the stars are in motion. Lactantius of the 4th century CE also mentions Archimedes' device, that it was a representation of the universe in hollow brass, and that motions unequal and resembling the revolutions of the heavens, and that the sphere, while it revolved, exhibited not only the approaches and the withdrawings of the sun, or the increase and waning of the moon, but also unequal courses of the stars, whether fixed or wandering. Claudian, also writing in the 4th century CE, had a poem literally called The Sphere of Archimedes. Pappus, writing in the mid-4th century CE, also talks about constructing spheres in which the images of the heavens are created. And even as late as the 6th century CE, Cassiodorus writes, I shall say a little about the skill which imitates the heavens without sin. This has set a second sun to revolve in the sphere of Archimedes. By human ingenuity, this has constructed another circle of the zodiac. By the light of art, this has shown how the moon recovers from its waning, and set turning by an invisible mechanism, a tiny device pregnant with the world, a portable sky, a compendium of the universe, a mirror of nature which reflects the heavens.
So although I will happily admit that none of the ancient sources are providing, an exact description of the Antikythera mechanism, they are describing things that do sound pretty similar. So you might be saying, sure, Hugh, I get it. There is objects in antiquity that charted the movement of celestial objects, but none of the descriptions that you have provided so far are mentioning things like cogs and gears and teeth and all of that stuff. Well, for that, we have to look at something slightly different. So let's go from one extreme, charting celestial objects and their movement across the sky, to another. How far is it from point A to point B? The thing I'm about to describe to you is not particularly exciting. It's an odometer. That is, something that measures distance. We know them because we have them in our cars. They're the little thing that you film when it ticks up to some grand number. However, the odometer was something that was incredibly important in antiquity. You need to measure distances between one place and another. Now, Vitruvius has popped up in previous videos of mine. You can see him up here when I discuss the optical illusions of the Parthenon. And Vitruvius must have been a real hoot at parties because he loves describing things in absolutely agonizing detail. And one of the things he describes is an odometer.
Vitruvius describes the odometer as having gears. He says, on the face of the drum, there are 400 teeth, placed at equal intervals and engaging the tooth of the drum below. Leonardo da Vinci even tried to recreate Vitruvius's description of the odometer. If you're wondering what it looked like, here is a recreation of the odometer from the Kotsanis Museum of Ancient Greek Technology in Athens.
So you can see from his description that he's probably talking about gears with teeth that are engaged with other gears with teeth. And Vitruvius is writing in the same century as to when the Antikythera shipwreck happened. To be fair, we don't have one of these odometers. We only have the descriptions. And you might be saying, Hugh, well, maybe Vitruvius has just exaggerated the truth a little bit or made something up. But I can tell you, as someone who has read so much Vitruvius, like way too much of it, Vitruvius, when he's talking about architecture or mathematics or anything, goes into just crazy levels of detail. And it seems unlikely that he's going to be inventing a device that is made up of cogs with teeth in the exact same century that the Antikythera Mechanism happened to sink on a shipwreck.
It isn't just Vitruvius who mentions gears. Pappus, who I mentioned earlier, also mentions gears in the mid-4th century CE.
The thing is that today we have all of these amazingly smart individuals who live on this planet, whether it's Einstein or people who are, crashing spacecraft into asteroids hundreds of thousands or millions of kilometers away from Earth. But the reality is that those same intellects, those same smarty pants people existed in antiquity. In order to show you how smart people were in antiquity, I want to introduce you to just one person, effectively the Einstein of the 1st century CE. And his name is Hero of Alexandria. Now, the interesting thing about Hero is that we don't actually know a lot about his life. We don't know when he was born, or even that he existed in the 1st century CE. There is a bit of debate about that. But we do know that Hero invented a bunch of stuff. He came up with a lot of mathematical formulas and he wrote it down. And that writing of Hero made its way into later historical sources, which we can now look at today. And what it shows us is that this guy, Hero, was a smart cookie. Hero invented a lot of devices which I find just truly spectacular. Some of them are simple and others much more complex. So what I want to do is show you some of them, modern recreations of how some of Hero's inventions worked.
So here's how the fountain works. You pour water into the dish at the top and it descends down a tube into a small container at the bottom. The pressure builds up in that container and that pressure is released through a small tube into a second chamber filled with water. That pressure then causes that water inside to push up through a spout, creating this fountain. It's simple, but effective.
It's not a perpetual motion device. It doesn't have a machine in it that will allow it to run forever. But Struth, it's just so cool. But Hero also invented something else, an alarm system for your house. Yep.
This alarm or doorbell worked by lowering a device into water, which, like the fountain before, would displace air and could be used to make this very annoying sound. But this is my all-time favorite. It's a vending machine used to get holy water. You pop in a coin, a mechanism is activated, and it sends out a small stream of this holy water into the cup. Now, Hero's devices may seem simple today, and they certainly aren't as complex as the Antikythera Mechanism, but they do demonstrate the point I'm trying to make, that smart people existed in antiquity. Hero was a smart person, Archimedes with his sphere, he was a smart person, and the unknown person who created the Antikythera device was also a smart person.
So in the end, yes, the Antikythera Mechanism is a truly phenomenal archaeological discovery. And this video is not me downplaying its complexity in any way, shape, or form. If you look at the Antikythera Mechanism in isolation, it does look like some kind of advanced piece of ancient technology. However, that's not how archaeology works. We need to look at all of the evidence. The good news is that there are lots of archaeological excavations taking place all over the world, and we're finding shipwrecks at a rate of knots. So who knows when the next piece of ancient technology is going to be found. If you've liked this video, I really encourage you to like, subscribe, do everything you need to do in order to see my content in the future. And if you have a suggestion for a topic you'd like me to dig deeper into, please let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.